Hi, I'm Celine. Last week, I walked into a bank just asked to withdraw $100. My own sister. The branch manager laughed and said, "We don't serve beggars here." Everyone stared, what they didn't know. I had the power to empty the entire institution, and I did. But the real withdrawal wasn't the money, it was my silence, my name, my loyalty. Ever been betrayed so quietly, it almost felt like your fault, until the truth turned the room cold. Keep watching because what happened next made her drop to her knees. Before we dive in, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it? There, drop a comment. I read. Everyone the chill had come early this year in Cincinnati leaves clung stubbornly to the last branches along 4th Street. A wind swept in from the river and the sidewalk glittered faintly from last night's frost. I pulled the scarf tighter around my neck. Deep wine red soft against my skin. I'd bought it at a street fair years ago on a day I dared to feel proud. Of simply being alive back then, $20 felt like defiance. I stepped through the heavy glass doors of the downtown Crescent Bank branch, not because I had much to withdraw, but because Mrs. Hutchkins from down the hall had quietly asked if I could spot her grocery money until Friday. I'd seen the way her fingers trembled, opening the fridge door, and how she smiled too brightly while skipping dinner. $100 would keep her pantry from going hollow. That was enough reason the bank smelled like eucalyptus and polished wood sleek. Sanitized, everyone inside looked like they belonged. The floor shimmered under the fluorescent lights. I wore thrifted jeans, clean but faded, and a coat I'd stitched at the seams twice this winter. Still I stood tall, the line moved slowly. I kept my eyes forward, heart steady. I could already feel a few glances crawling over me. The kind people give when they can't quite tell if you're lost or just poor. Then I heard it. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" The voice slithered behind my ear before I turned. Refined, performative, polished like glass that had never cracked. Vera, she wore winter white. Of course she did. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks across the tile as she made her way toward me, a practiced smile glued in place behind her. A young teller trailed, looking nervous. "Celine," Vera said, her tone syrupy sweet and loud enough for the rest of the line to hear. "Still using this branch, are we?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I looked at her and only her same painted lips. Same smug tilt to her chin. She never needed to raise her voice to cause a scene, just her presence alone. Rearrange the room, she leaned in. "You know, we've updated our client tiers. We don't really serve walk-ins anymore." Then she added louder this time. "Especially not beggars." A man in a navy suit looked up from his phone. An older woman near the window turned her head. I stood still, the word echoed like a slap in a cathedral. Vera smiled wider, like she'd just been charitable. "You do understand, don't you?" I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, but because I'd learned long ago. Silence is sometimes louder than shouting. I touched the scarf at my neck, the fibers familiar. My fingers rested there a moment longer than they needed to. Then I stepped out of the line. My boots made no sound on the tile. I walked right past Vera. Without another word outside, the cold kissed my face with a kind of mercy. My reflection in the bank's polished glass door lingered for a second. Head high, eyes steady. I didn't cry. Not anymore that night back in my apartment. I peeled off my coat and scarf. The place smelled like peppermint tea and old books, my kind of peace. I set the scarf gently on the table, folded it once, then again, then let my hand rest over it. I powered on the old laptop tucked beneath the couch cushion. The screen flickered twice before settling. I typed in my passphrase, fingers moving without hesitation. A soft ping, one message encrypted. Expected, I read it twice, then closed the lid. My heart didn't race. It moved slower with purpose across the room. I picked up the scarf once more, the last time I wore it. Like armor was years ago when Vera called me nothing but a soft-spoken parasite at a Christmas party. I wasn't even invited to. I remembered whispering to myself afterward while buttoning my coat alone in the snow one day. "They'll see tonight I didn't whisper, I didn't need to." Instead, I reached for my phone and dialed a number. None of them even knew I had the line connected. "Hey," I said. Voice calm. It's Celine. I need a favor. I didn't answer Vera's calls that night. Not that she called. She never does. But I imagined for a moment what she'd say. If she knew who still had access to the one person who could shut her entire branch down with a single command. By the time I got back to my apartment, the late November air had settled into a cold stillness. Cincinnati streets gleamed with moisture from an earlier drizzle, streetlights flickering against the sheen of wet pavement. I climbed the narrow stairs to my second-floor unit. The familiar creak of each step grounding me, I slipped the wine-colored scarf from my neck and hung it by the door. It looked different now, not like something to hide behind, but like something I'd chosen deliberately. Inside the apartment was quiet, save for the hum of my old radiator. I made a cup of tea I barely touched, then sat down at the small dining table that doubled as my workspace. I pulled the laptop toward me, its edges worn smooth from years of use. It took 3 encrypted login to get through, first a fingerprint scan, then a 6-digit rotating code sent through a secure satellite line. Finally, a phrase I typed it slowly. Foxglove never forgets for a breath. The screen stayed dark. Then the portal opened a sleek interface few in the world had ever seen, and fewer still had the credentials to navigate. My name wasn't anywhere on it. That was intentional in another life, or maybe just another version of this one. I helped build a security protocol so airtight, it made headlines without ever mentioning us back then. I went by a different name. M. Dove, an alias built from an inside joke, and a real bird I once nursed back to health on a foster farm in Arizona. The message pinged in from R.A., "You're finally ready." I stared at the blinking cursor for a while, then typed, "It's time." He didn't ask why, he never did. We designed it that way, clean, no back and forth, only purpose. When I first walked away from my family, it wasn't in shame, it was strategy. Every time I tried to tell them I had plans, that I wasn't going to just drift through life, they'd laugh. "You?" My father once scoffed, tossing my resume onto the table without even looking. "You'll be lucky if a gas station lets you wipe the windows." Fair was worse. "Maybe aim lower." "Celine," she said when I mentioned applying for a fintech internship. "The world doesn't owe you a fancy desk." They all laughed and I vanished, not because I was weak, because I needed space to build something they'd never touch raw. And I registered the fund through 5 countries, each one with its own wall of legality. We called it Shell Code 7. I handled the system architecture and trust design. He raised the initial capital by the end of year 2. I held the majority stake tucked behind layers of fiduciary anonymity. No one, not even my accountant, could link me to it without access to this terminal. And Vera, her bank, had been trying to woo Shell Code 7 as a silent partner for years. They'd finally succeeded in hosting a portion of our liquidity last quarter. I reviewed the contract myself, watched her signature appear under these onboarding papers, completely unaware who she was signing beneath. When our father passed, Vera was handed the estate. My name wasn't mentioned for her own good. The will read as if keeping me poor was an act of mercy. Now I opened the command panel and typed, "Show me active accounts under Shell Code 7. The screen populated instantly. Figures rolled across the interface, quiet, precise, unforgiving. $3. $5 billion in liquid assets. It wasn't just money, it was leverage, it was time. I could buy silence, I could break dignity, I could reclaim my fingers. Hovered above the keyboard, a tremor of uncertainty flickering through me for a second. I felt that old tug. What if they're right? What if I'm still that girl, begging for crumbs? But then I remembered Vera's voice at the bank. "We don't serve beggars here," and I pressed. Enter the room didn't change, nothing exploded. But inside me something shifted, like a thread that had been tangled for years. Finally snapped into place. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the weight of it sit in my hands before I set it down. Then I reached for my phone. I scrolled past the names of people I hadn't spoken to in years past group chats. I'd muted into oblivion, and then I tapped one single contact schedule, an appointment tomorrow in person at Vera's branch. I looked over at the scarf by the door, no longer a shield now. It was a marker of everything they thought I wasn't, and everything I never needed to prove until now. By the time I stepped out of the car and adjusted the lapels of my jacket, the morning sun had climbed high enough to reflect off the tall windows of the main branch. Downtown, I stood for a second at the base of those glass doors, not hesitating but letting the moment settle. It was strange how calm my hands felt. No shaking, no second thoughts. A man in a gray suit held the door open for me. "Ma'am." He nodded. I smiled politely, then walked inside the same marble floors, the same fresh scent of over-polished wood. But this time, everything looked smaller. The reception desk was manned by a young woman I didn't recognize. "Good morning, welcome to. I have an appointment," I said softly, pulling a sleek black folio from my bag. "It's under Shellcode Holdings." Before she could ask another question, her screen blinked red. A flicker of confusion crossed her face just then from across the lobby. I saw Vera. She'd changed since yesterday. Fresh makeup, hair curled just a little tighter than usual. She was laughing with a regional client near the coffee machine, but the moment she spotted me, her face changed. She crossed the floor like a storm cloud in heels. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "I told you yesterday we're not a charity. Whatever stunt you're trying to pull, don't." I didn't reply. I simply handed the folio over to the receptionist. She opened it, scanned a QR code tucked into the side panel, and blinked again. "I'll need to get the manager," the receptionist said quickly. Already picking up the phone, Vera reached over and yanked the folio out of the woman's hands. "Enough, let's see what my little sister thinks she's playing at this time." She flipped through the papers, her smirk slowly slipping, and then it happened. Her eyes froze. She glanced down, flipped one more page, and looked up again, only this time. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. The branch manager arrived, a tall man with silver hair and a calm presence. The kind of person trained to handle crisis without showing it. He took the folio from Vera's hands. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, nodding to me. "Give me just a moment." He glanced at the screen, typed something. Then he stopped. He turned to Vera, his voice lower. "Now this is a VIP level authorization, primary withdrawal request, flagged as sensitive shellcode. Holdings, you're listed as an employee in a partnered entity. Did you know the silence that fell over the bank wasn't just quiet? It was suspended." A few junior bankers turned to look. I heard a sharp inhale from someone standing behind a cubicle. Vera backed up half a step, the color draining from her cheeks. That can't be real. That's some kind of fake. It's real," I said. Meeting her eyes, "You've been working for me indirectly, of course, all these years," while laughing behind my back, the manager's assistant whispered something to him. He nodded once, then read from his screen. "Withdraw authorized amount requested, 3.5 billion confirmed entity signature lockdown. Initiated for audit compliance, lobby closed, pending security validation." The receptionist locked the front doors. One of the younger associates dropped her pen. Vera's mouth opened, but no words came out. She was pale, stiff then, like something cracked inside her. She stumbled forward, actually stumbled, and dropped to her knees, right in front of me. "Celine," she whispered, eyes wide, almost pleading, "don't do this, don't ruin everything. You don't understand what this will do to me. Please, I have a child, I have a career." I tilted my head slightly. "You ruined yourself," I said, my voice low, "and even all I ever did was step back and let you behind her." Someone gasped. The manager didn't intervene. No one did. Vera shook her head, her mascara already smudging beneath her eyes. "You're my sister, am I? I asked, you all made it clear I wasn't part of the family long ago for a second." The only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. No shouts, no alarms, just silence and eyes. Dozens of them watching this woman who had paraded power, now curled up on the floor begging. I turned to the manager. "I'd like to speak to someone from the executive suite privately. This matter doesn't need to be handled on the main floor." He nodded instantly, already pressing the call button for the internal elevator. "We'll bring you to the investor lounge," as I walked past Vera, still frozen. I didn't even glance down. The folio stayed tucked under my arm, and as the glass doors of the elevator slid shut, I heard nothing behind me but the kind of silence that says everything had just changed. I didn't even make it to the couch before my phone buzzed again. The glass door had just clicked shut behind me, and I was still sliding out of my heels. I glanced at the screen, Clarice straight to voicemail. I didn't need to hear her voice right now. Not when I could already guess the tone. Tight, fake concerned, like she was calling out of obligation instead of interest. I poured myself a glass of Pinot and stepped out onto the balcony, letting the night air settle my chest. The city hummed below distant sirens, a bus groaning at the corner, someone laughing 4 floors down. All of it felt quieter than usual, as if the world knew something had shifted another buzz. George this time, Clarice's husband. I hesitated, then picked up. If nothing else, George was predictable. He always called when something was at stake. Celine, he said, drawing my name out like he'd rehearsed warmth, but couldn't quite land it. Evening, George, I said, resting my wine on the railing. Did Clarice lose her voice? He gave a forced chuckle. No, she's just... Well, you know how she gets when things catch her off guard. I didn't reply. I actually wanted to check in. He went on, saw some movement, a few transfers showing up. Impressive, really. We didn't know you were so involved in that level of finance as that. So I said lightly. Because I've always been told to stay in my lane. George coughed, just making sure everything's kosher. You know, with the trust, the assets Clarice mentioned, you'd been investing in some projects. Private ones. I didn't answer right away. My gaze drifted toward a blinking tower in the distance. You mean the ones you all used to laugh at during brunch when Clarice said I should marry someone rich instead of pretending to be a founder? His silence hung like smoke. It's funny, I continued, how my phone only rings when there's a $sign attached. George cleared his throat again. Well, Clarice and I were thinking maybe we should all get together, talk through things. No pressure, just brunch. Maybe this weekend. The audacity almost made me smile. I'm afraid my weekends are full, lots of pretending to be important. I didn't mean it like that, he said quickly, almost stumbling over his own voice. It's just Clarice thinks. Maybe we didn't always treat you fairly there. It was a drop of half apology soaked in self-interest. I appreciate the outreach, I said evenly. But I don't think brunch will fix what's already broken. I ended the call gently and set the phone down beside me. My fingers were steady now. No tremble, no heat of anger. Just calm, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I went inside and opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. The screen blinked to life, and with a few clicks, I pulled up the dashboard. My dashboard. The company logo hovered in the corner. Understated professional, one of the top 10 holding companies in the region. My name sat quietly in the ownership tab. Still the controlling shareholders, still untouched. Then came Carmen's message flashing in the corner of the screen. Vera just tried to access the executive panel, it read. I blocked her. I exhaled through a grin. Of course she did, I typed back quickly. Let them wonder. I leaned back, sipping the last of the wine. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for the leather folio tucked on the second shelf of my bookcase. Inside it, under contracts and sealed letters, was the photograph worn at the edges. Faint from the sun, but unmistakable, me maybe 8 years old. Hair a mess, missing a front tooth, and my grandfather kneeling beside me, holding up a rusted wrench like we just fixed the world. You always said I was the one no one saw coming, I whispered. That man had been the only one who looked past my silence, past the awkwardness, and said, let her build, she'll surprise you. I brushed my thumb across the photo, and then my phone buzzed again. A new message from Carmen. They just invited you to a family dinner. Want me to accept on your behalf. I stared at the screen, then at the photograph in my hand. I wasn't sure if they were looking for closure or if they just smelled money. I didn't respond to Carmen's message right away. I sat with the invitation still glowing on my screen, my fingers tracing the edge of the trackpad without clicking a family dinner. After months of silence and then a storm of voicemails, they'd suddenly remembered I existed when it suited them. I waited a day, then another. Finally, I texted Carmen back. Yes. Except I want to see who shows up Friday. Arrived with a weight that settled on my shoulders like an old winter coat. I dressed deliberately, nothing too flashy, just sharp a navy blouse, tailored trousers, hair neatly tied back, the kind of look that said, I'm not here to entertain you. By 6:45 p., I was walking through the doors of a restaurant that used to be our family's go-to for celebrations. It smelled the same rosemary, garlic, fresh linens. But the meaning had shifted. A hostess guided me toward the back, where a long table sat under a warm pendant light. A small sign rested against the centerpiece, reserved for the first time in a long while. That word didn't sting. I placed my hand on the back of the chair at the head of the table and sat down, alone for now. The seconds ticked by. Then, at precisely 6:57, I heard a familiar clack of heels. Clarice was first. Chanel earrings, polished lips, too big of a smile. "Well, someone's glowing," she cooed, sliding into the seat opposite mine, like we were lunching at the club. "You've been busy, haven't you?" I didn't respond, just tilted my glass slightly. Letting the candlelight catch the rim, George arrived next. Always just a beat behind. Clarice still had that fake investor grin pasted on like a permanent fixture. "Celine," he said with a tone that tried too hard to sound brotherly. "It's been too long, you look grounded." "That's a good thing." Before I could reply, Vera walked in. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just nodded and took the seat farthest from me. Finally, our mother, Helen. She moved slower than I remembered. Time had softened her features, but not her tone. "My girls," she said, like it was still 1993, and we were in matching dresses for some staged family photo. "Look at us." I kept my eyes on the napkin in my lap. The waitress came and took drink orders. Clarice ordered wine. George copied her. Vera just asked for water. Mom wanted chamomile tea. Then the syrup started. "Celine." Clarice purred. "I have to say something's different. There's a calm in your eyes now. Almost serene. Are you meditating, doing yoga?" George chuckled. "Or maybe just making smart investments. I've actually been meaning to ask you about a little project I'm kicking off. Thought maybe you'd want to give it a once-over, just as a favor." Helen leaned in, clasping her hands like she was praying. "We've all been through a lot." She began, her voice dipping into that trembling register she used when she wanted to sound fragile. "Since your father passed, things have been complicated. We were trying to hold everything together. I counted in my head, we never you. Not once had they said we were worried about you, or we should have reached out. Just we, like they were one unit, and I'd always been the misfit puzzle piece." Clarice put her wine glass down and finally asked what they'd all been dancing around. "Are you okay?" Her voice was light, but her eyes scanned me like a detective at a crime scene. I offered a polite smile, then leaned slightly forward. "Did any of you ever wonder what happened to grandfather's Pennsylvania land trust?" The shift was instant, like someone had turned the thermostat down 20 degrees. George blinked. Clarice sat up straighter. Helen's hands tightened around her teacup. It was Vera who broke the silence. "That trust was dissolved years ago, wasn't it?" I reached into my bag, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it gently on the table. The word "active" was stamped in the top right corner of the deed, actually. I said, meeting Vera's stare, "It wasn't. It was forgotten, buried." "But I never let it die," Helen whispered. "You kept it." I nodded. I rebuilt it quietly. And no one noticed. The waiter appeared as if on cue, holding a leather check. "Holder, will this be on one bill or separate tonight?" I didn't even glance at the others this time, I said as I stood, slipping the strap of my bag over my shoulder. "Everyone covers their own." No one spoke. I walked slowly, deliberately past the stunned table of people who once told me I had no head for business. No place at the table outside. The air hit my face like a welcome gust of clarity. I was halfway to the corner when I heard footsteps hurrying behind me. "Wait," Vera called out, her voice sharper than before. "You're not really planning to sell it, are you?" Vera's voice echoed after me as I stepped out into the cool evening. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. That sentence told me everything. They'd felt the shift for once. I wasn't reacting. I was leading. And the silence I left in that restaurant, that was the loudest statement I'd made in years. By Monday afternoon, the sky over the city had dulled to a soft gray, the kind that makes even glass towers feel somber. I walked briskly past the marble facade of the bank, not toward the main entrance with its polished revolving doors, but down the side corridor. Most customers never noticed a security guard already expecting me. Nodded silently and pressed the biometric panel. The private elevator let out a faint chime as it opened. I stepped in alone, the doors closing with a kind of finality I hadn't felt since burying Dad. No music hack, no mirrors, just brass and breath. It took me directly to the floor that housed the bank's legacy archives, vaults, boardrooms, and the real heart of the institution. The vault office, the walls here didn't wear screens or artwork. They wore names etched into the stone, men and women who had shaped this city's financial arteries. And now apparently me. I pushed through the thick oak door into the boardroom. 7 men and women sat around a wide oval table. Most of them older, most of them careful, all of them waiting. A few shifted in their chairs. One nodded in quiet acknowledgement. The air had the crisp chill of legal consequence. I set the folder down in front of me. This isn't a courtesy update. I began. This is a legal alignment of trusts, charters, and oversight. As of last Thursday, the 1954 Pennsylvania Legacy Trust, once chaired by Arthur Lev, is officially merged into the primary holdings of this bank's foundation as the named beneficiary. I hold majority control. There were no gasps, just silence, until Robert Templeton Graysuit, oldest of the group, spoke gently. You've had this structured for some time, haven't you? I looked at him. 14 months. He smiled. We've been waiting for someone like you since Arthur passed. The moment landed heavier than I expected. Clarice burst in. 15 minutes later, heels too loud, hair perfect, eyes wide with confusion. She looked at me like she still hadn't decided if I was bluffing or having a breakdown. I slid a sealed envelope across the table toward her. From legal, for you. Her fingers hesitated. Then she opened it. I watched the color fade from her face as her eyes scanned the words, formal removal ethics clause, retaliatory misconduct during fiduciary interaction, all documented, all signed. George, seated stiffly beside her, tugged at his collar. You can't just take everything. We're your family. I kept my voice even. Exactly. And that's why I didn't take everything, just the part you tried to erase. He looked away. No fight left. I turned back to the board. Effective immediately, we will restructure under a revised family ethics charter. No one here will lose their job today, but the game of nepotism ends now. Titles will match merit, past behavior will be audited, and every single Community F-facing fund will undergo a full integrity review. One of the younger board members nodded clearly. Relieved, Clarice tried to regain footing. You've always held this resentment, haven't you? I shook my head slowly. I've always held receipts. Resentment is optional. Her mouth opened to protest, but she must have thought better. The paper in her hand weighed too much. Now the board voted unanimously with no debate. When the meeting adjourned, I stayed behind alone. I walked through the adjacent corridor, past rows of old vaults behind one glass panel. A plaque still bore grandfather's name. I stopped. Looked closer, and right beside it, freshly etched mine. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding something they had hollowed out. As I turned to leave, a line from my grandfather's last conversation with me replayed in my mind. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, sweetheart. It's what you clean up. I stepped back into the elevator and descended without a word. That evening, after a long shower and a quiet dinner, I returned to my apartment just past 9. As I reached down to retrieve my keys, I noticed something different. A letter slid under the door. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. It was from my mother. That evening, after returning from the vault, I changed out of my blazer and heels, lit a single lamp in the corner of my apartment, and tried to ease into the quiet. The rain had started not long after I got home, tapping its fingers gently against the tall windows, like it too was waiting for something to break. I was reaching for a blanket when I noticed it. An envelope slid neatly under my door. No knock, no footsteps in the hall. Just the thing itself lying there, like it had always belonged. I didn't need to turn it over. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My mother's script, neat, sharp, unflinching, a style that said everything was under control, even when it wasn't. I stared at it without moving. Funny how a few strokes of ink could feel heavier than any confrontation I'd faced in the boardroom. My fingers hovered for a moment, then pulled back when someone has cut you out with silence for so many years. Even their words can feel like razors eventually. I sat down, peeled it open with slow fingers, and began to read Celine. It started, "No, my darling," or "Sweetheart." No softness to land on. There's something I've carried for a long time. Something I should have told you before it got this far. The lines were penned cleanly without crossings out or hesitation. She had practiced this, probably rewritten it 3-4 times before letting it go. She wrote about a summer day when I was around 10. I had tried to start a lemonade stand at the end of our driveway. I'd drawn posters, worked out prices, even counted the sugar packets one by one. I remembered it vaguely until she mentioned how Clarice had accidentally spilled the jug, before I even made my first sale. I'd cried, but I hadn't understood why my sister had done it. I thought she just didn't like lemonade, but the letter continued. I knew I saw what she did, I just didn't know how to protect both of you. And in the end, I didn't protect either. She spoke of my grandfather's passing, how the family finances became unstable, almost overnight. George had offered stability, she wrote, in exchange for support. Clarice's fast promotion, her early involvement in decisions that should have been yours. They made it look like security, she wrote. But it was control, and I allowed it. I paused. My hands felt colder than the window pane beside me. All this time, I had thought her silence was a choice, but maybe it had been survival, not just for her, but for both of us. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't ask to be understood. I'm not writing this for forgiveness. She ended, but I am asking you to break the pattern. Don't become what hurt you. I sat for a long while after that. No tears, no dramatic exhale. Just the rain outside and the soft crackle of paper still open in my hand. After some time, I stood and crossed to the shelf where I kept things from childhood I hadn't thrown away in a small box behind old photo frames. I found it a little blue ledger notebook, creased dusty at the corners inside, were pages of handwritten business plans from a 10-year-old trying to figure out what lemonade and kindness had in common. Doodles of coin jars, break-even charts and marker, and tucked between 2 pages. A wrinkled sticky note with a sentence I hadn't remembered writing. One day, I'll have a big vault, and I won't leave anyone out. That little girl had no idea what was coming. But somehow she still knew what mattered. Maybe I hadn't changed. Maybe finally I was just remembering who I was before they tried to break me. The rain picked up, rattling more insistently now. Like it wanted me to pay attention, I closed the ledger, placed it back in the box, and stood at the window for a while, watching lights blur across the wet glass. Tomorrow I would return, not to ask for space, not to beg for acceptance tomorrow. I'd walk into our childhood home, not as a daughter, but as a reckoning. The wind that morning was sharp, threading through the old wrought iron gate, like a whisper that had waited years to be spoken. I stepped onto the familiar stone path without knocking. My heels tapped against the marble foyer, as if echoing back all the times I'd been asked to tiptoe to make myself small in this house. Inside, the warmth of the room didn't touch me. Clarissa's voice floated from the dining hall, thick with performative charm. She was entertaining again. Extended family, old friends, likely a few new investors eager to ride her coattails. I knew the kind. I'd seen their type at countless biotech galas, eyes scanning for status, smiles too white to be real. I walked straight in her voice, faltered mid-sentence forks, paused midair. A cousin from Vermont coughed into his linen napkin. My mother perched at the end of the table, delicate pearl necklace clasped too tight. Met my eyes, she didn't look away. Clarice blinked. Well, this is unexpected. I set the thick black folder on the edge of the marble buffet, not even glancing at the canapés she loved to order to appear worldly. I smoothed my coat, looked out across the room, and said calmly, "If I may, I'd like to make a small withdrawal of the truth." The silence that followed was tight. Clarice laughed, that brittle laugh she used when she didn't know where the floor was anymore. "Celine, if this is some dramatic cry for attention." "No," I interrupted, turning to the crowd. "This is a matter of documentation, not drama." I opened the folder and began quietly, steadily first. The trust originally signed by our father with equal distribution between his daughters, then the forged amendment dated 2 weeks before his stroke. I displayed a copy of the notary stamp, then turned to the property deeds. The silent reallocation of the family vineyard in Oregon transferred into an offshore holding account under Clarice's shell company. Gasps, whispers. Next, the educational endowment misused the one meant for young women in STEM, which Clarice had repurposed into a personal real estate venture. The funds were pulled under our mother's signature, I added. Pulling up the PDF copy of the authorization, Clarice's lip twitched. She gave me permission. You don't know everything, Celine. She couldn't have the date on. This is the same day she was in surgery in Zurich. Heads turned, a family friend passed me a laptop. I plugged in the USB drive. The screen flickered on behind me with quiet precision. I scrolled through transaction logs, timelines, emails, nothing flashy, just data. Truth, Clarice's voice cracked. You always needed to be the victim, didn't you? I turned to her. No, I just wanted to be seen. You wanted to erase me. Her hand trembled as she gripped the stem of her champagne flute. Our father stood up. Clarice, he said, voice low, hoarse, what have you done? And just like that, the performance cracked. Clarice flung her napkin onto the table. This is what she does. She digs and digs until there's nothing left to bury. She's always been jealous. But the room was no longer with her. Relatives began excusing themselves. One couple from our father's side walked out silently. Another uncle muttered something about disgraceful behavior before shaking his head and heading for the door. Our mother didn't say a word, but she didn't stop me either. She just sat there, eyes trained on her plate, as though listening to something far older than any voice in that room. I turned back to the folder, added one last piece of letter, written in our mother's own hand, addressed to the family lawyer retracting her consent to the transfers. It was dated 6 weeks ago, this house, I said softly. Closing the folder has 2 doors. I looked at Clarice. One last time, her face, red breath, shallow hands still trembling today. I continued, I walk out the one you didn't build, and I left the folder right there on the marble table she'd once called her throne. The air outside was cooler now, sharper, cleaner. Celine walks out only to find a young reporter waiting on the sidewalk. His camera wasn't up, just a notebook in his hand and a hesitant smile on his face. He didn't ask a single question. He only said, "Someone wanted you to be heard, thought you should know." 1 week later, I sat alone on a wooden bench beneath an old oak tree. The park was quiet this early. The kind of quiet that hums like a secret waiting to be kept or told. Golden slivers of sunlight spilled through the leaves, and the breeze carried the scent of cut grass and distant lilacs. I looked down at the object resting on my lap, a frayed little savings book, faded blue, the kind you'd see decades ago in a neighborhood bank. The corners curled, the ink smudged in places, but it was real, just like the memory of the man who gave it to me. I withdrew everything I needed that day, I murmured to myself. But it wasn't money. After the confrontation at the estate, things unraveled fast. I never gave a statement to the press. I didn't need to. The young reporter. He got his story elsewhere, apparently. Someone from inside the bank, maybe a clerk tired of keeping quiet, tipped him off not to some trashy gossip column, but to a financial justice blog that took ethics very seriously. Then came Mr. Holloway, my grandfather's best friend, the same man who used to bring peppermint candies in his coat pocket whenever he came to visit. He gave the interview. I never would talked about Granddad's values, about how he'd built the trust for me after watching how invisible I was treated even as a little girl, how he'd told Holloway, "One day she'll need to know she mattered to someone. That day will come, mark me." The interview went viral, not in the tabloids, but on financial compliance forums, legal groups, ethics watchdogs. It struck a nerve, the kind that unravels threads, long stitched tight within 72 hours. The board at Clarice's bank requested her resignation quietly, of course, professionally. Her license was suspended pending review. No flashing headlines, no courtroom circus, but enough that she couldn't hide behind her job title anymore. My phone rang 4 times after that. Once from a number I didn't recognize, but knew by heart. Mother's cell. Once from the estate landline, then again the next morning. And again I never picked up. I didn't need to hear what they had to say. I already knew there would be no apology. Only panic disguised as concerned questions like, "Why did you make it public?" or "Why couldn't you just let things be?" But the truth was, I had let things be for far too long now. I shifted on the bench, adjusting my coat as the sun inched higher behind the trees. I opened the savings book, gently careful not to damage the pages. Most of it was blank now, his deposits long withdrawn or moved. But there, tucked at the very back, was something I'd never noticed before. Folded into the inside pocket was a yellowing scrap of paper handwriting. Neat and strong for the youngest, because she has the biggest heart. Use it when they forget who you are. I blinked hard, then smiled. Not the kind of smile you wear for photos, but the quiet kind that slips in when something settles into place. I realized right then I had never needed their approval. Not mother's clipped praise, not father's stiff acknowledgement, not Clarice's dismissive glances. I had something sturdier myself. I closed the book slowly, let it rest in my lap, and exhaled a long, full breath. No fireworks, no victory parade, just stillness and peace across the lawn. A low modern building came into view. Steel and glass, modest but solid, it bore a new sign. Now my nonprofit's name embossed in brushed silver. We just moved in last month, but today would be the first day I walked in. Not with fear, but with ownership, with presence. This was the real withdrawal. Not the assets in the trust, not the property titles or the frozen accounts. It was my name. I pulled back my loyalty, my love. I took it all out from the ones who'd wasted it, and I invested it somewhere new. Somewhere it could grow funny. How? Money reveals character, but silence earns interest too. I stood from the bench, brushing off the back of my jeans as I tucked the savings book gently into my bag. A small flutter caught my eye. A single bird had landed beside me, just out of arm's reach. Not startled, not begging for crumbs, just present. Like it had come to sit with me for a moment to share the stillness. I didn't shoo it away. I didn't need to. I just let it be.